Welcome to Calm Mysteries, a quiet place where forgotten history, lost kingdoms, and unsolved secrets drift softly through time. There is nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember. Just listen, relax, and let the past carry you gently into sleep. The queen who outlived her kingdom. You stand in the palace gardens at dawn, watching mist curl around ancient stone fountains that no longer flow. The silence here feels different than it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when these paths bustled with courtiers and servants, when the fountain spray caught morning light like scattered diamonds. Now the only sound is your footsteps on gravel that hasn't been raked in months, and the distant cry of crows nesting in the abandoned east wing. Your name is Marguerite, though few remain who remember to use it. Most who still live in the palace simply call you Your Majesty, out of habit more than reverence. You're 73 years old, though you feel simultaneously ancient and strangely ageless, as if time has lost meaning in this place, where clocks no longer wind and calendars no longer turn. You have been Queen of Valoron for 51 years, longer than many of your subjects have been alive, longer than some of your subjects will ever live. The irony doesn't escape you that your greatest achievement, your longevity, has become your greatest burden. The kingdom you rule exists now only in name and memory. Valoron, once a proud mountain realm of 80,000 souls, has dwindled to fewer than 500. The exodus began slowly, imperceptibly, like water seeping through stone. First, the young people left, seeking opportunities in the lowland cities where industry promised wages your agricultural economy couldn't match. Then the merchants followed, their shops closing one by one along the high street that once hummed with commerce. The craftsmen went next, their skills unneeded in a shrinking population. Finally, whole families departed, abandoning homes their ancestors had occupied for generations, leaving behind only the old, the stubborn, and the few who simply had nowhere else to go. You tried to stop it, of course. In the early years, when the problem seemed manageable, you instituted tax incentives for young couples, established apprenticeship programs, invested royal funds in modernizing the mountain roads. You traveled to the lowland capitals, negotiated trade agreements, sought investment. You gave speeches about tradition, about heritage, but the unique character of mountain life. But you were competing against forces larger than yourself, larger than any single kingdom. The world was changing, had been changing since before you were born, and Valoron was simply too small, too isolated, too tied to old ways to change with it. The palace itself stands as a monument to better days. Built in 1647 by your ancestor King Leopold IV, it sprawls across 3 acres of terraced hillside, a Baroque masterpiece of golden limestone and slate roofs, or it did. Now whole wings sit empty, their furniture covered in dust sheets, their tapestries fading in shuttered darkness. You live in perhaps a tenth of the space, occupying the old royal apartments that overlook the valley. The rest you've sealed off, unable to heat or maintain rooms no one uses, unable to bear walking through halls that echo with absence. Your staff has dwindled along with everything else. Once, the palace employed 200 people, cooks, cleaners, gardeners, stable hands, pages, ladies-in-waiting, advisors, guards. Now you have 12. Marie, your lady's maid, who is 68 and has been with you for 42 years. Jean-Claude, the steward, 71, who manages the household with quiet efficiency, despite having no household to manage. Old Thomas, the gardener, who at 83 still tends what he can of the grounds with hands twisted by arthritis. Pierre, the cook, who prepares meals for a royal household that consists of you alone. And 8 others, equally aged, equally loyal, equally trapped in this slow dissolution. You walk through the morning garden, touching the heads of flowers that have gone to seed. The formal gardens that once required a team of 6 gardeners now survive through Thomas's stubborn devotion and benign neglect. Roses bloom wild, having escaped their beds to scramble over paths and statuary. The hedge maze your grandmother planted has grown shaggy and irregular, its geometric precision lost to years of insufficient trimming. Yet there's a strange beauty in this decay, you think. Nature reclaiming what was always hers, softening the hard edges of human design. Your morning constitutional takes you past the old stables where once 30 horses lived in cushioned luxury. Now there are 3, kept more for sentiment than use. Your mare, Celestine, is 27, well past her riding years. The others are draft horses, maintained because someone must pull the cart that brings supplies up the mountain road from the village twice a month. You pause to stroke Celestine's velvet nose, and she whickers softly, pressing her face against your palm. These small moments of connection have become precious beyond measure. The village of Valeron sits 2 miles down the mountain, a cluster of stone houses huddled around a market square that sees markets no more. When you first became queen, the village population was 12,000. Now perhaps 200 remain, mostly elderly, subsisting on small pensions and kitchen gardens. The young people are gone, the children are gone, and the few middle-aged adults who remain do so only because living would mean abandoning aged parents who refuse to go. You return to the palace as the sun climbs higher, painting the limestone walls the warm honey colour that once made visitors gasp. Inside, the grand entrance hall yawns empty, your footsteps on marble creating echoes that sound like ghosts. Portraits of your ancestors line the walls, 47 generations of rulers stretching back to the kingdom's founding in 812. You pause before the portrait of your father, King Henri VII, painted when he was 50, the age you remember him best. He looks out from the canvas with the confident expression of a man who believed his kingdom would outlast him by centuries. You wonder what he would think if he could see it now. Marie waits in your apartments with morning tea and the daily report, though report is perhaps too grand a word for the single sheet of paper that summarizes the kingdom's business. Yesterday, 3 more families applied for immigration permits, a formality since you no longer deny such requests. The village baker died in his sleep, leaving no one to take over his shop. A tree fell across the north road, blocking access until someone can clear it, but there's no one to do the work. The monthly pension payments will be distributed next week, funds drawn from reserves that diminish a little more each year. You read the report while sipping tea from a porcelain cup that's part of a set commissioned by your great-great-grandmother. Once there were settings for 60. Now perhaps 20 pieces remain unbroken, scattered across the years of accidents and attrition. You handle the cup carefully, aware that when it breaks, there will be no replacement. The ambassador from Moncrieux sends his regrets, Marie says, her voice gentle. He won't be attending the summer reception. Is there a reason given? He's been recalled. Montclair is closing its embassy. Of course they are. You're not sure why you maintained the fiction that anyone still needed an embassy in Valoran, a kingdom with no trade, no strategic value, no relevance to regional politics. Montclair is the fourth embassy to close in as many years. Soon there will be none, and you'll be truly alone. A queen in name presiding over a kingdom that exists on maps, but nowhere else. Cancel the summer reception, you say quietly. There's no point. Marie nods, unsurprised. The summer reception, a tradition dating back 2 centuries, usually drew diplomats and nobles from neighbouring kingdoms. Last year, 7 people attended. The year before, 15. You cannot bear the indignity of hosting a reception for no one. The morning passes in the small routines that structure your days. You review accounts with Jean-Claude, though the numbers are depressingly simple. Diminishing revenue, diminishing reserves, diminishing everything. You sign documents that maintain legal fictions, land deeds for property no one wants, trade agreements no one honors, treaties with kingdoms that barely acknowledge your existence. You write a letter to the Council of Regional Governors, requesting assistance with road maintenance, knowing it will be politely declined as all such requests have been declined for the past decade. Lunch is served in the small dining room, a cosy chamber that once hosted intimate dinners for 12. Now it hosts you alone. Pierre has prepared vegetable soup from the kitchen garden and fresh bread. Simple food beautifully presented on china. So fine you can see light through it. You eat slowly, taste in the care in every element, grateful for Pierre's continued commitment to excellence despite having no one to impress. After lunch, you walk to the library, a 2-story room lined with books accumulated over centuries. The collection includes first editions worth more than most houses, manuscripts illuminated by monks long dead, scientific treatises, poetry collections, histories of kingdoms that no longer exist. You've read many of them during these quiet years. Reading has become both escape and mirror, showing you other ways kingdoms have fallen, other ways civilizations have ended. You select a volume of ancient history, the rise and fall of the Aramean kingdoms in the centuries before Christ. The author, writing in 1793, describes how these small states were absorbed by larger empires, how their languages disappeared, how their gods were forgotten. Yet they lasted for centuries before their dissolution, you note. Your own kingdom is collapsing in a single lifetime. A mercy, perhaps, or a tragedy, depending on how you frame it. The afternoon light slants through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drift in air undisturbed by human movement. You read for hours, lost in accounts of kings and queens who faced their own versions of your dilemma. Some fought to preserve their realms, launching wars they couldn't win. Others negotiated mergers, marriages, peaceful absorptions into stronger neighbours. A few simply withdrew, maintaining royal dignity in ever smaller circles until death released them from the burden. What would you choose, if you could choose? But that's the cruel trick of your situation. There are no choices left. The kingdom is dying, not because of any decision you made or failed to make, but because historical forces larger than any individual have rendered it obsolete. The mountain fortress that once provided security in an age of cavalry warfare means nothing when modern armies move by rail. The isolation that once protected unique culture now cuts you off from economic opportunity. The traditions you've preserved so carefully appeal to no one who must live in the modern world. Evening comes slowly, the sun sinking behind western peaks, painting snow-covered summits in shades of rose and gold. You stand at your bedroom window, watching the light feed, and remember doing the same thing as a young queen, newly crowned at 22 after your father's sudden death. Then, you watched the sunset and thought about the future, about the changes you would make, the legacy you would build. You were so certain you could guide Valeron into the modern age while preserving what made it special. You were so young. Marie helps you dress for dinner, though there's no one to dine with, no one to impress. But you maintain standards, refusing to let go of this last shred of royal dignity. You wear a gown of deep blue silk, simple but elegant, and the sapphire necklace your mother wore, a piece so beautiful it makes your heart ache. Marie arranges your white hair, still thick despite your age, into an elaborate style that takes 20 minutes and serves no purpose except to affirm that you are still a queen, still deserving of care and ceremony. Dinner is served in the formal dining room at a table that seats 40. You sit at the head, your place set with silver and crystal, with multiple courses presented in perfect sequence. This charade of normalcy has become both comfort and torment. You maintain it because to abandon it would be to admit defeat, to acknowledge that you're no longer a queen, but simply an old woman living in an oversized house. Yet maintaining it requires everyone around you to participate in a fiction that grows more absurd with each passing year. Pierre has outdone himself with roasted duck, glazed vegetables, a delicate potato gratin. You eat slowly, savoring flavors while trying to ignore the vast emptiness surrounding you. The 40 empty chairs, the silence broken only by the clink of your fork against porcelain. After dinner, you withdraw to your private sitting room, where a fire burns. A luxury now, as fuel grows scarce, and the foresters who once managed the royal woodlands have all departed. You sit with embroidery, a piece you've been working on for 3 years, a complex pastoral scene that may never be completed. Your fingers, still nimble despite arthritis, guide the needle with practiced precision, creating beauty for no purpose except that you need to create something, to make something that might outlast you. Jean-Claude brings the evening report, more accurate than morning summary, because the day's events have concluded. The tree on the north road remains uncleared. You've no budget to hire workers from the lowlands. The village cooper died this afternoon, the 3rd villager to pass this month. The monthly pension fund is running lower than projected. You may need to reduce payments, though reducing them further seems unconscionable when your subjects already live on so little. How much do we have left? You ask, meaning the royal treasury, the reserves built over centuries. Jean-Claude hesitates, then answers honestly, as he always has. At current expenditures, perhaps 5 years, Your Majesty. Less if we continue the pension payments at their current level. 5 years. You'll be 78, 79. You'll likely die before the money runs out, which means this problem will be someone else's, except there is no one else. You have no children, no siblings, no heir. The royal line ends with you, as does the kingdom itself, as does everything. Maintain the pensions, you say. Our people deserve that much. Yes, Your Majesty. He withdraws, leaving you alone with your embroidery and your thoughts. The fire crackles, consuming wood that represents forests you no longer control, resources you can no longer replenish. Everything is running out. Money, people, purpose, time. You are a queen without a kingdom, a ruler without subjects, a figurehead maintaining traditions that mean nothing to anyone but yourself. Yet you cannot stop. Something in you refuses to simply surrender, to walk away, to abdicate and retire to some lowland city where you could live in comfortable anonymity. Perhaps it's pride or stubbornness, or a misplaced sense of duty to ancestors who trusted you with a legacy you failed to preserve. Perhaps it's simpler than that. Perhaps you simply don't know how to be anything other than what you've been for 51 years. Night deepens outside your windows. The village below shows only scattered lights now, perhaps 30 houses still occupied, their windows glowing against darkness. You remember when the entire hillside blazed with light. Hundreds of homes, the village so bright it seemed to compete with the stars. Now the stars have won, reclaiming their dominance over a landscape returning to wilderness. Marie helps you prepare for bed, unlacing the beautiful gown, helping you into a nightdress of soft cotton. Your bedroom hasn't changed in 50 years. The same carved furniture your grandmother used, the same tapestries depicting hunting scenes from an age when these mountains teemed with game. You climb into a bed sized for royalty, meant to be shared but occupied only by yourself, and Marie wishes you good night with the gentle formality that defines your relationship. Alone in darkness, you think about tomorrow, which will be exactly like today, which was exactly like yesterday. You'll wake, dress, walk the gardens, review accounts that spiral downward, sign documents that mean nothing, eat meals prepared with love for an audience of one, read books about dead kingdoms, watch the sun set over your dying realm, and go to bed wondering if you'll wake to find yourself the last person left in a palace built for hundreds. This is your life now, has been your life for years, will be your life until death finally releases you from the obligation of ruling nothing. You are the queen who outlived her kingdom, though technically the kingdom still exists, still appears on maps, still has legal standing in international agreements. But kingdoms are not made of lines on maps or legal documents. They're made of people, of shared culture, of collective belief in something larger than individual existence. And by those measures, Valoran died years ago. You simply haven't accepted it yet. Sleep comes slowly, as it always does, your mind circling the same thoughts, the same regrets, the same questions about what you might have done differently. But you know the answer. Nothing. You did everything possible, exhausted every option, made every reasonable choice. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes history moves in directions that individual will cannot alter, and all that remains is to bear witness to endings you cannot prevent. The palace settles around you, old timber beams creaking, wind whistling through gaps in stone walls that need repointing, pipes groaning in a heating system maintained beyond its intended lifespan. These sounds have become your lullaby, the voice of a building slowly dying, accompanying you into dreams where the palace is full again, where your kingdom thrives, where you are young and the future stretches endlessly before you, full of possibility instead of certain conclusion. Morning arrives with pale light filtering through curtains you've stopped drawing closed. There seems little point in privacy when no one is watching, little need for the rituals of concealment when you're alone. You lie in bed longer than you should, reluctant to face another day identical to all the others, another dawn in a kingdom that exists only because you stubbornly refuse to acknowledge its death. Marie brings tea at 8, as she has for 4 decades, her movements so familiar they require no thought. She draws open the curtains fully, revealing mountains still capped with snow despite the advancing season. Spring comes late and briefly at this elevation. Summer barely establishes itself before autumn arrives, and winter dominates almost half the year. These harsh conditions once forged hardy people. Now they simply drive away anyone with the option to leave. You dress with Marie's help, choosing a simple day gown of grey wool, appropriate for a morning of administrative duties no one will witness. The elaborate costumes of your youth hang in wardrobes, magnificent gowns designed for state occasions that no longer occur. Sometimes you consider donating them to museums, but that would require admitting they'll never be worn again, admitting that the occasions they represent are permanently past. Breakfast is served in your private sitting room, a more intimate space than the formal dining room. Pierre has prepared eggs from the palace chickens, toast from yesterday's bread, jam from last summer's fruit. The chickens represent one of your more successful adaptations. A flock of 30 hens provides eggs for the remaining staff and surplus for the village. Small victories, you've learned, matter more than grand gestures when everything else is failing. Jean-Claude appears during breakfast with news that the village priest has requested an audience. Father Benedict is 81, has served Valeron's church for 53 years, and is one of the few people remaining who remembers the kingdom in its prime. You suspect you know what he wants to discuss. He's been hinting for months that it might be time to have certain conversations about the future, about succession plans, about what happens when you die. Tell Father Benedict I'll receive him at 11, you say. The morning passes in familiar routines. You review household accounts, noting that flour is running low, that the chickens need new feed, that Marie's arthritis medicine needs refilling from the lowland pharmacy. You sign documents authorizing these small expenditures, each signature a reminder of how reduced your realm has become. Queens used to sign treaties, declarations of war, land grants encompassing thousands of acres. You sign requisitions for chicken feed. At 11, Father Benedict arrives, moving slowly with a cane, his face a map of wrinkles that shift when he smiles. He's known you since childhood, officiated at your coronation, buried your parents, shared your grief as the kingdom diminished. You trust him more than almost anyone, which makes his visits both comfort and challenge. He sees through your defenses, understands your pain, and insists on conversations you'd prefer to avoid. Your Majesty, he says, settling into a chair with visible relief. Thank you for receiving me. Father Benedict, tea? Please. You pour from the pot Marie left, the silence comfortable between you. But you know this is temporary, that he's come with purpose, and soon the comfortable silence will become uncomfortable conversation. I've been thinking about legacy, he begins, and you resist the urge to sigh, about what we leave behind when we go. Rather morbid thoughts for such a pleasant morning. Perhaps, but necessary ones, I think. He sips his tea, choosing words carefully. You've been queen for 51 years. You've served with dignity and dedication. No one could ask more. Yet the kingdom has failed anyway. The kingdom has changed. That's different from failure. Is it? You set down your cup with more force than intended. I watch people leave daily. I seal off palace wings I can't maintain. I pay pensions from diminishing reserves to subjects who stay only because they're too old to go. This is failure, Father, whatever polite words we use to disguise it. He's quiet for a moment, letting your anger settle. When he speaks, his voice is gentle. What do you imagine happens after you die? I try not to imagine it. But you must. You have no heir, no succession plan, no provision for the transition of authority. Because there's nothing to transition. Whoever comes after me inherits an empty palace and legal responsibility for 200 elderly villagers. Exactly. Which is why we need to plan. The kingdom will need to be formally dissolved. The land, the property, the remaining assets, they'll need to be distributed or transferred. Your subjects will need provision made for their care. You stand moving to the window, unable to sit still during this conversation. Outside, old Thomas moves through the garden, pruning shears in hand, maintaining beds that probably won't see another season. His dedication shames you. He continues working with no guarantee of future, no certainty beyond the present moment. I've been drafting a proposal, Father Benedict continues. With your permission, I'd like to present it. It involves negotiating with Moncrieux for absorption. They're willing to assume responsibility for remaining residents, maintain the palace as a historical site, preserve the archives and collections. It's a dignified solution. Dignified, you repeat, the word bitter on your tongue. You mean final. I mean realistic. Your Majesty, I say this with love and deepest respect. The kingdom is already gone. We're maintaining a beautiful fiction, but it is fiction. The question isn't whether Valoran ends, but how it ends. Gracefully, with provision for those who remain, or catastrophically when the money runs out and services collapse. He's right, of course. You've known he's right for years. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are vastly different things. Agreeing to absorption means admitting defeat, signing documents that erase 8 centuries of independent history, reducing your ancestors' achievements to a footnote in Moncrieux's records. How long would the process take? Legally, perhaps a year. There are treaties to negotiate, property rights to establish, residency questions for remaining subjects, but we should begin soon. Your health is excellent, thank God. But you're 73. We can't risk waiting until crisis forces rush decisions. You turn from the window, facing him directly. If I agree to this, what happens to the palace, the collections, the things my ancestors built and gathered? Moncrieux has proposed converting the palace to a museum. The collections would be preserved, made accessible to scholars and visitors. The chapel would remain active. I'd continue serving as long as I'm able. The village would receive infrastructure investment, new roads, modern utilities, perhaps attracting some tourism. It could actually revitalize the area, just in a different form. A museum, your home, your family's seat for generations, reduced to exhibits behind velvet ropes. Tourists wandering through your grandmother's bedroom, your father's study, the halls where you played as a child. The idea fills you with revulsion and relief in equal measure. Revulsion at the indignity, relief that perhaps something would survive, that the beauty and history wouldn't simply dissolve when you die. I need time, you say finally, to consider, to process. Of course, there's no immediate rush, but, Your Majesty, he pauses, meeting your eyes. Don't wait too long. Don't let pride or grief cloud judgment. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about ensuring the best possible outcome for people who've remained loyal to you, to Valeron, despite every reason to leave. After he goes, you sit alone, his words echoing. The best possible outcome. What is that, when all possible outcomes involve ending? Perhaps he's right that preservation as a museum is better than abandonment and decay. Perhaps managed dissolution is better than catastrophic collapse. Perhaps admitting defeat gracefully is its own kind of victory. But oh, how it hurts. How it rips at something fundamental in your sense of self to imagine signing documents that erase your kingdom from current existence, relegating it to history. You are a queen. You've been a queen since 22. You've never been anything else. Never imagined being anything else. Who are you if not the ruler of Valeron? What identity remains when the thing you've devoted your entire adult life to simply stops existing? Lunch passes in solitude, the food tasteless, your appetite vanished. You force yourself to eat anyway. Pierre's feelings would be hurt if you sent back untouched plates. After lunch, you walk to the archives, a temperature-controlled room in the palace basement where centuries of documents are preserved. The archives smell of old paper and leather bindings, dust and time. You pull volumes at random, reading the history of your kingdom in official records. Birth registries showing thousands born per year in Valeron's prime. Trade manifests from 1700s, when your kingdom exported fine wool and silver throughout the region. Military records from the defensive wars of 1763, when your great-great-grandfather held the mountain passes against invasion. Marriage registers, death registers, property transfers, court proceedings, the accumulated bureaucracy of 8 centuries of governance. What happens to these records under absorption? Presumably they'd be preserved, integrated into Montcrieux's national archives, studied by historians writing dissertations about the decline of small mountain kingdoms in the modern era. Your life, your reign, will become data points in someone's academic analysis of political obsolescence. You find the coronation record from your own accession, June 14th, 1973. 51 years ago, exactly in 2 months. The document lists the ceremony attendees. 300 nobles, diplomats from 20 kingdoms, representatives from the regional council, merchants' guild leaders, military commanders, all the machinery of a functioning state, now dispersed, dead, or too old to matter. The final page of your coronation record contains your oath, written in your own young hand. I swear to preserve and protect the kingdom of Valeron, to serve its people with justice and wisdom, to maintain our traditions while guiding us toward prosperity, to rule with the welfare of all subjects as my highest concern. You trace the words with one finger, remembering the earnest young woman who wrote them, believing she could fulfill promises that proved impossible. Have you failed these promises? You've certainly not preserved the kingdom. It's dying despite your best efforts. But you've served the remaining people as well as possible, maintained pensions and services far beyond financial prudence, spent your own reserves ensuring your subjects' basic needs were met. You've preserved traditions, perhaps too well, maintaining ceremonies and customs that lost meaning when no one remained to value them, and you've ruled with welfare in mind, always, even when that meant accepting painful realities about your kingdom's future. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps you can release yourself from the burden of promises made when circumstances were different, when the future seemed manageable. Perhaps survival, continuing to exist with dignity, despite impossible circumstances, is its own kind of success. Evening finds you in the portrait gallery, walking past your ancestors' painted faces. Leopold IV, who built this palace, Marguerite III, who established the wool trade that sustained the kingdom for 2 centuries, Henri V, who negotiated the treaties that kept Valoron independent during the wars of 1699. They stare from their frames with expressions of confidence, certainty in their importance, their permanence. What would they think of you, the queen who let it all slip away? Would they understand the forces beyond your control, the historical currents too powerful for any individual to resist? Or would they judge you harshly, a failed guardian of their legacy? You'll never know. The dead keep their opinions to themselves, offering no comfort, no absolution, only silent witness to your struggle. Dinner is quiet, you eating alone at the great table, trying not to hear how your fork sounds in the emptiness, how each swallow seems amplified by silence. Pierre has prepared your favorite meal, roasted chicken with herbs from the garden, potatoes au gratin, fresh asparagus. The food is perfect, as always, and you eat mechanically, tasting nothing, your mind elsewhere. After dinner, you make a decision. You call for Jean-Claude and give him instructions to arrange a meeting with representatives from Montcrieu. If you're going to seriously consider absorption, you need to understand the terms, the details, the reality of what you'd be agreeing to. No more avoiding, no more delaying. Father Benedict is right. You owe your remaining subjects a planned transition, not a crisis born of your inability to face reality. That night, you sleep poorly. Dreams filled with signing ceremonies, document after document bearing your signature, each one erasing a piece of your kingdom until nothing remains but your name on papers no one will read. You wake multiple times, disoriented, uncertain if you're dreaming or remembering, if the kingdom's end has already happened or is yet to come. Morning arrives grey and cold, clouds obscuring the mountains, rain falling in sheets. The weather matches your mood, somber, heavy, oppressive. You dress and go through morning routines in a fog of exhaustion and resignation. The meeting with Montcrieu is scheduled for next week. You have 7 days to prepare yourself for conversations about your kingdom's dissolution. The days pass slowly, each one heavy with anticipation. You review documents Father Benedict provided, technical papers detailing the legal process of absorption, examples from other small kingdoms that have undergone similar transitions. The language is dry, bureaucratic, reducing centuries of history to clauses and subclauses, but the message is clear. With proper planning, the transition can be smooth, the remaining population protected, the cultural heritage preserved. The meeting itself takes place in the formal reception room, a space you've barely used in years. Representatives from Montcrieu arrive, 3 men in modern business suits that look incongruous against the baroque splendor of the palace. They're polite, professional, treating you with the deference your title demands while making clear they represent the future while you represent the past. The terms they propose are more generous than expected. Montcrieu will assume all debts and obligations, provide pensions for remaining residents at current levels, maintain the palace as a national historical monument, preserve the archives and collections, and grant Valoron status as an autonomous cultural district within their kingdom. Your title would become honorary. You could remain in the palace for your lifetime, and the name Valoron would continue on maps, if not as an independent kingdom. What you're offering, you say slowly, is a dignified retirement for a kingdom. The senior negotiator, a man named Marcel, who speaks with careful diplomacy, nods. We prefer to think of it as evolution, Your Majesty. Valoron's independence served important purposes for 8 centuries. But circumstances change. This allows what's best in Valoron to continue while relieving you of burdens that have become unsustainable. And if I refuse? If I choose to maintain independence until the money runs out? That is your right, absolutely, but he glances at his colleagues. Forgive my bluntness, Your Majesty, but that path leads to harder outcomes. When services collapse, when pensions stop, when the palace becomes uninhabitable, these things will happen without planning. People will suffer. The collections could be scattered or lost. The historical record fragmented. We're offering a way to preserve what matters while providing for those who remain. You dismiss them after 2 hours, promising to consider their proposal carefully. They leave behind folders of documentation, legal frameworks, financial projections. That night, you spread these papers across your desk, reading late into darkness, trying to find some flaw in their logic, some reason to refuse that isn't simply your own pride or pain, but there is none. The proposal is fair, reasonable, perhaps the best outcome possible given circumstances beyond anyone's control. Accepting it means admitting defeat, yes, but it also means protecting your people, preserving your heritage, ensuring that something of Valoron survives beyond your death. 3 days later, you make your decision. You call Jean-Claude to your study and give him instructions to inform Moncria that you're prepared to proceed with negotiations. His relief is visible. He's feared what might happen if you continued refusing reality until crisis forced worse alternatives. You're making the right choice, Your Majesty, he says quietly. I'm making the necessary choice. Whether it's right remains to be seen. The negotiation process takes months, as Father Benedict predicted. Lawyers examine every detail. Historians catalogue the collections. Accountants audit the finances. You sign document after document, each one transferring some aspect of sovereignty to Moncria. Property rights, judicial authority, taxation, defense, trade, all the mechanisms of governance, signed away in legal language that transforms living institutions into archived history. Through it all, you maintain routines. You walk the gardens each morning, review accounts, eat meals prepared by Pierre, embroider in the evenings. Life continues in its diminished form well around you. Lawyers dismantle the legal framework of your kingdom. The surreal quality of this period defies description. You are simultaneously queen and not queen, ruling and abdicating, present and already past. Summer arrives, and with it the final ceremonies. On July the 23rd, 2024, in the same reception room where you were crowned 51 years earlier, you sign the final dissolution treaty. Representatives from Moncria witness, along with Father Benedict, your remaining staff, and a handful of elderly villagers who made the difficult climb to the palace. The document is simple, elegant in its finality. By this action, the sovereign kingdom of Valoron, established in 812, voluntarily joins the Kingdom of Montcrea, maintaining cultural autonomy while ceding political independence. Her Majesty Queen Marguerite retains her title and honours for life, and the preservation of Valoron's heritage is guaranteed in perpetuity. Your hand shakes slightly as you sign, not from age or infirmity, but from the weight of what this signature means. 8 centuries of independence ended with a pen stroke. Your ancestors' legacy concluded in your lifetime. The kingdom that shaped your entire existence reduced to a historical footnote. But as you set down the pen and look around the room at the faces watching, Jean-Claude with tears in his eyes, Marie dabbing at her cheeks, Father Benedict nodding encouragement, the villagers standing with quiet dignity, you realize something important. The kingdom may be ending, but the people remain. The culture, the traditions, the memories. These don't dissolve with legal documents. They live in those who carry them forward, who remember, who tell the stories. After the ceremony, there's a small reception, wine and simple food, conversation that carefully avoids the magnitude of what just happened. The Montcrea representatives are gracious in victory, praising your wisdom and grace. The villagers thank you for ensuring their pensions will continue, for fighting to preserve what could be preserved. Your staff simply stands close, their loyalty undiminished by changed circumstances. That evening, alone in your study, you pour yourself a glass of very old brandy from a bottle your father laid down in 1957. You raise the glass to the portrait of your grandfather on the wall, and to your father beside him, and to all the ancestors whose faces line the gallery. "I'm sorry," you whisper. "I did my best. It wasn't enough, but it was everything I had." The brandy burns going down, warming from within. Outside your window the village lights glow in gathering darkness. Fewer than before, always fewer, but still there, still persisting, still home to people who've chosen to remain despite every difficulty, every reason to leave. Perhaps that's the real legacy of Valoron, not political independence or territorial integrity, but the stubbornness of people who love these mountains, who value community over convenience, who maintain connection to place and history, even when the world offers easier alternatives. As long as those people exist, as long as they remember, something of the kingdom survives. The months following the dissolution bring changes both subtle and profound. Montcrea invests in infrastructure, new roads, updated utilities, internet connectivity that finally reaches the village. Engineers examine the palace, identifying repairs needed to preserve the building for its future as a museum. Historians begin the long process of cataloguing collections, creating inventories and provenance records. Your own role shifts from ruler to historical resource. Scholars interview you about palace life, about traditions and ceremonies, about the daily reality of governance. You show them through the archives, explain the context of documents, share stories your father and grandfather told you. In a strange way, this feels more meaningful than signing administrative documents ever did. You're preserving not just objects, but knowledge, context, the lived experience that gives meaning to historical artifacts. The village, surprisingly, begins to revive. A few younger families move in, attracted by cheap housing and the newly available internet, able to work remotely while enjoying mountain life. A small cafe opens, the first new business in 15 years. The changes are modest, but after decades of decline, any growth feels miraculous. You're invited to the cafe's opening, and you go, walking down the mountain road with Marie and Jean-Claude. The owner is a woman named Sophie, perhaps 35, who moved from the lowlands seeking quiet and community. She's nervous, serving tea to a queen, but you put her at ease, praising the pastries, admiring the cheerful space she's created. "I hope you don't mind," Sophie says hesitantly. "I've named the cafe the Queen's Rest, as a tribute to Valeron's history." You're surprised to find yourself touched. "I'm honored, truly." "My grandmother grew up here," Sophie continues. "She talks about the old days, when the kingdom was thriving. I wanted to come back, to be part of rebuilding, even if it's different now." Different. Yes, everything is different, but different isn't necessarily worse. This young woman, building a business in the village your ancestors founded, carrying forward connection to this place, perhaps that's continuity enough. Autumn arrives with its usual swiftness at this elevation, the brief summer yielding to cold nights and brilliant foliage. The maple trees around the palace turn scarlet and gold, beautiful in their dying, and you spend hours walking among them, breathing air so clean it almost hurts. Your routines continue, adapted to new circumstances. You still rise early, still walk the gardens, still eat Pierre's carefully prepared meals. But now there are visitors, scholars, tourists starting to trickle in as word spreads about the palace opening as a museum. You give occasional tours, sharing stories about the portraits, the furniture, the history embedded in every room. It's strange being a historical exhibit in your own home, but you adapt. Everything about your life has required adaptation. Why should this final phase be any different? Winter comes, snow falling early and deep. The palace heating system, never adequate, struggles more than usual, and you spend most days in the small sitting room where a good fire can keep you warm. Marie worries about your health, insisting you wear extra layers, drink hot tea, stay away from drafty corridors. But you've never felt better. Strangely, the burden you carried for so long, the weight of maintaining a fiction, of ruling a dying kingdom, of failing to preserve what your ancestors built, has lifted. The kingdom is gone, yes, but you're still here, still yourself, still finding meaning in each day. On your 74th birthday, a small celebration is held in the village. Perhaps 40 people attend, a mix of elderly long-time residents and newer arrivals like Sophie. They've organized a dinner at the cafe, and you sit among your former subjects, though they're not subjects anymore, just neighbors, friends, people connected by shared place and experience. Speeches are given, toasts raised. Father Benedict speaks about your dedication and service. Jean-Claude reads a letter from Montcrieux's king, praising your wisdom in ensuring a peaceful transition. Sophie presents a photograph she has found in her grandmother's belongings. Your coronation day, the village square packed with thousands, everyone celebrating the young queen taking her throne. You study the photograph, seeing yourself at 22, so young, so hopeful, so certain the future could be shaped by will and effort. That young queen would be devastated by how things turned out. But you, 74 and tired, and strangely at peace, can see what she couldn't. That failure and success aren't simple opposites, that doing your best matters even when it's not enough, that endings are also beginnings of something new. "Thank you," you say, your voice carrying in the quiet room, "for staying, for remembering, for building something new while honoring what was." You've given me the greatest gift possible, proof that Valeron isn't truly dead while you remain. The winter passes slowly, snow piling high, the palace quiet except for the small circle of warmth around your daily life. Spring comes eventually, as it always does, snow melting, crocuses pushing through the earth, life insisting on itself despite every hardship. And you persist to, one day following another, each morning a small miracle, each evening a quiet victory. You are Marguerite, 74 years old, former queen of a kingdom that no longer exists, current resident of a palace becoming a museum, survivor of a slow catastrophe that you couldn't prevent but managed to endure with dignity intact. This is your life now. Small, diminished, nothing like what you imagined at 22, but it's yours and you've made peace with it, and that peace is its own kind of kingdom, one that can't be signed away or dissolved or lost to forces beyond your control. You walk in the morning garden, touching flowers that bloom despite everything, and you think, I am still here. That is enough. That will always be enough.